Alrighty, hello everybody. This is DJ. I made a video yesterday explaining some of the procedures of the Airbus, but it's very long and it crashed halfway through. So I think it's better to do these videos on a smaller scale, but also be a little more thorough on the procedures. And I think the right way to start is to make a bunch of small videos explaining different things before we actually hop onto the airplane and start flying it. So the very first thing I like to discuss is checklist procedures. As you know, flying an airliner is very checklist centric. So if we start with the checklist and then we discuss PMPF and then we start each individual flow, I think is the best way we can accomplish something in this channel, because I like to go on tangents, so little by little is the best way to do it. This is the Airbus A320 and A319 normal checklist from Airbus as of November 2017. The checklist is just a measure to make sure that things are accomplished as we finish them. But as part of a checklist comes a flow. Usually you always have a flow where you set those items up before you do the checklist. And the checklist is just a measure to make sure that you have accomplished everything. It's a double check. So, for example, there will be sections on the checklist before start, for example. You have a before start flow. Once you finish that, then you do the checklist. The checklist is also divided into sections. Before start, after start, before takeoff, after takeoff, approach, landing, parking, securing the aircraft. Each small section also may be divided into two sections. Above the line, which there's a line here, we call that to the line. So before start checklist to the line, we'll finish right there. Then when you call below the line, you continue that section. The reasons why we have above the line and below the line may be because some of those things cannot be accomplished until you're almost ready to go. For example, before start checklist, you have your flow, you get a bunch of data ready, but you cannot finish that until things start happening. For example, the windows and doors, you can't close the door until everybody's on board, but it doesn't make sense to run the checklist through its entirely the entire checklist at the beginning if you haven't done those things. So you divide it into two, that way you can get a bunch of stuff done, go to the line. Then later on, when things start happening, the doors close and other things happen, when you're ready to go, you can do below the line. You have less workload. So again, the checklist is divided into sections, and then each section may be divided into subsections, to the line and below the line. When I made the video yesterday, I said usually you say, okay, before start checklist to the line. Yes, you could call before start checklist to the line, but then normally once you call that, then you wouldn't say before start checklist anymore. When you're ready for below the line, you just call for below the line. So the captain will say before start checklist to the line. Later on, once he's ready for the rest, you'll say below the line, please. Some of them may have values on here. So the pilot monitoring will always read the checklist, and then the pilot flying and sometimes both of you will respond. You usually both hold the checklist. Some people have the answers memorized, but it's a good practice to hold the checklist in front of you. So when the PM monitors calls cockpit prep, you say complete, and he will also say complete, but you want to say verbatim as to what the checklist says. So if he calls cockpit prep, you don't want to say done, you want to say complete. Again, this is standardization to make sure that you're both on the same page. So some checklists for certain airplanes may have a diamond checklist. There will be some items, for example, on before takeoff, there will be diamonds on some of the items. Those diamond checklists may be because, for example, let's say you're taxiing, you're already briefed, and you're already done everything, you're ready to go, and then they change the runway and they change the departure on you. Well, that diamond checklist will help you accomplish those certain things that need to be done before departing on that different runway and the different departure without having to redo the entire checklist as a whole. So you just call diamond checklist, please. And it will be 3-4 items, and you just do those 4 items, and then you'll be done. Then you continue with the rest of the next section of the checklist like you would anyways. On this one, the Airbus does have diamond checklists. I don't see it here. There's also other things on the Airbus checklist that is kind of interesting. For example, they don't all happen, like I said, below the line and to the line and below the line. So, for example, the after takeoff checklist, the moment the gear comes up and then the flaps are retracted, the pilot flying will call for after takeoff checklist. You do this. That's probably usually happens around 1,500, 2,000 feet above the field. So you do the after takeoff checklist down to the line, and then below the line doesn't happen until 18,000 feet, maybe 20 minutes later. So sometimes it takes a while to accomplish these checklists because they're designed to happen at different stages of the flight. So after takeoff checklist, you can call for the after takeoff checklist as soon as your flaps go up, and you say flap 0 after takeoff checklist. Then at 18,000 feet, you'll call for below the line. And that was just has one item. BRF, standard set. You both say it and then you continue. There is no cruise checklist because it doesn't need to be. Most airplanes don't have a cruise checklist. At least most commercial airplanes. The approach checklist, I kind of give you guys a timeline. When you first get to the airplane, you load up, you do your flows, you load up the box, you get your clearance, you do a before start checklist. You call for below the line once everything is closed up and you're ready to go. Once you start both engines, you call for after start checklist. And once you're taxiing, usually once your flows are done, then you do before takeoff checklist to the line. Then once you're clear for takeoff and you're lining up, you do below the line. After takeoff checklist is done, like I said earlier, once the flaps are retracted. But below the line for the after takeoff checklist is done at 18,000 feet. Or, sorry, for those of you in Europe, in Latin America, in Asia, the below the line, the barrel ref has happened wherever your transition altitude is. For example, yesterday in Costa Rica was 19,000 feet. In the US it's 18. Many places in Europe are 5,000. So it could happen very quickly after you take off or much later, depending on the country where you are at. The approach checklist has an approach flow, which I'm going to go through all the flows on other videos. The approach checklist will have happens at 10,000 feet. So as you descend to 10,000, you do your flow and you call approach checklist. The landing checklist happens once your gears down and the flaps are fully extended. So flaps for landing. Once you set your flaps for landing, whether you're landing flaps 3 or flaps full, you go for landing checklist. Here's another intricacy about the checklist. Right here where it says landing checklist, you will roll cabin, secure for landing, outer truss, speed or off, go around altitude. It said ECAM memo. These things under here, the ECAM memo activates. These 4 items show up on the upper ECAM saying landing gear down, signs are on, spoilers are armed, and flaps are set. That memo does not come on until 1,800 feet radar altitude, or 1,800 feet, 1,800 feet above the field. So if you want your landing checklist before that, you're not going to get this memo. So you cannot say landing no blue because there's no memo there. So usually you have to wait until you are within 1,800 feet radar altitude in order for the memo to show. For whatever reason the memo doesn't show, or you have blue items, then you actually have to read these items. As long as the ECAM memo is up and there are no blue items, then you do not have to read these. So the landing checklist would be, usually you call it flaps full landing checklist. Then you run it, and as long as, like I said, as long as there are no blue items and the memo is there, all you have to say ecam memo is landing no blue. So you only read these items if there's something blue, or if the memo is not there for whatever reason. As soon as you touch down, you do your after landing flow, and then your parking checklist will be done once you're at the gate, engines off, parking brake set. You usually never ever do a securing aircraft checklist if the aircraft, it's usually for us, we leave the airplane on. We do not shut the power off to the airplane unless we're being told, and but usually for my operations we always have a mechanic there ready to go. So the mechanics, we finish the parking checklist and the mechanics do all the rest. Usually when we show up to the airplane, the power is running. We don't have to bring, the airplane is never in a cold and dark situation unless it's been sitting for a few days. So again, I know I'm not the best explaining things, but that is my explanation on the checklist. The next video will be talking about PMPF duties and what each pilot does. And then from there, we're going to start doing each individual flow. So, all right, thank you. Let me know if you guys have any questions.